I arrived at the office a little early as usual. The autumn sun had that warm, golden glow spilling through the glass walls of our high rise, making everything inside feel softer, more alive. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling my senses, and checked the meeting schedule. My boss, Michael, had called me in to discuss the upcoming quarterly reports. Nothing unusual, nothing thrilling, just spreadsheets, projections, and the occasional nod of approval. When I entered his office, he was already there, leaning casually against the edge of his desk. Michael was in his late 50s, with that kind of calm confidence that made people both respect and feel comfortable around him. He smiled when he saw me, and for a moment, the hum of the city outside felt distant, like we were in a little bubble all our own. "Take a seat, Marissa," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice was quiet but deliberate, carrying a warmth that I hadn't really noticed before. I sat, straightening my blazer, preparing myself for the usual corporate talk. But as soon as we started discussing the numbers, I felt it, a shift in the air. Not dramatic, not overt, but subtle, like the pause between heartbeats when someone's words linger longer than expected. I laughed nervously at a small joke he made about a missed deadline, and that's when it happened. He leaned in slightly, close enough that I could see the faint lines around his eyes soften, and whispered words that caught me completely off guard. He said, "Marissa, I've always admired the way you handle things. It's rare to see someone bring both intelligence and heart to the same table." I blinked, just blinked, because it sounded like a compliment, but there was something more. A resonance that hit deeper than any corporate praise ever could. It wasn't about me being good at my job. It was about me, the real me, and somehow he had noticed. My cheeks warmed, my pulse quickened, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the way his gaze softened as he spoke. We continued talking, but the spreadsheets seemed to fade into the background. The conversation took on a rhythm that felt intimate, like two people discovering a connection in the quietest corners of their lives. He asked questions about my family, my hobbies, my weekend plans, small, ordinary things, but the care behind them made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. By the time the meeting ended, I left the office with a swirl of emotions: surprise, curiosity, and an odd sense of anticipation. Michael had not crossed any lines, not even remotely. But in that brief exchange, he had opened a door I didn't even know was there, and I found myself wondering what lay on the other side. Walking back to my desk, I realized that sometimes the most profound moments aren't the ones you plan for. They sneak up quietly, wrapped in ordinary words, ordinary gestures, and leave a mark that lingers long after the moment has passed. And I had a feeling this was just the beginning. After that meeting, I couldn't focus on much else. My mind kept replaying Michael's words, the way they had landed softly yet firmly in a place I hadn't even realized was waiting for them. I tried to dive into emails, reports, anything to distract myself, but it was no use. There was a strange, quiet energy that followed me through the office that day, like the hum of a string pulled taut. Later that afternoon, Michael asked me to join him for a walk outside, just a short break to clear our heads. The office had a small terrace on the 15th floor, overlooking the city streets below. As we stepped out, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fall leaves and distant coffee carts. The noise of traffic felt softened by the height, and for a moment, it was just us, suspended between the buildings and the sky. He spoke about work, yes, but the way he spoke was different now. There was patience in his tone, a genuine curiosity that went beyond deadlines and projections. He asked how I had been feeling lately, really feeling, not just the polite surface answer we give when people ask about our day. I told him honestly, a mix of exhaustion, a touch of anxiety about the next quarter, and a little excitement at the small victories that often went unnoticed. Michael nodded, listening intently, and then said something that made my chest tighten. "I admire the way you carry yourself, Marissa. You're steady, thoughtful, And there's a warmth in you that people don't always see in the office. His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried an undeniable sincerity. We walked in silence for a few moments after that, letting the city's distant sounds fill the gaps. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the simple presence of two people standing close enough that the warmth of his shoulder brush against mine felt grounding. I realized I had been craving this, a connection that wasn't about business or protocol, but about recognition, respect, and something almost tender in its simplicity. When we returned inside, something had shifted. I caught myself glancing at him differently, noticing the way his hands moved when he spoke, the slight furrow of concentration on his brow, the subtle kindness in his eyes. It was nothing overt, nothing scandalous, but it felt electric in a quiet, understated way. Over the next few days, our interactions took on a new rhythm. He'd ask about my weekend plans, share a story from his own life, or pause in conversation just long enough for me to realize he was genuinely listening. And I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years, revealing thoughts and feelings I usually kept tucked away. One evening, as we were wrapping up a late meeting, he said, almost casually, "I enjoy our conversations, Marissa. They make the day feel lighter." And I felt it again, that subtle pull, that warmth, that recognition that seemed to linger even after he left the room. It was strange and thrilling all at once. I had never imagined a workplace could feel like this, like a space where emotional honesty wasn't just allowed, it was invited. I began to understand that what was happening between us wasn't a fleeting spark of attraction. It was something deeper. A connection built on mutual respect, genuine interest, and an emotional intimacy that neither of us had rushed into, yet neither of us could ignore. As I left the office that evening, the city lights twinkling below like scattered gems, I realized that I was standing on the edge of something unexpected, something delicate, yet undeniable. And for the first time in a long while, I was eager to see where it might lead. Over the next week, the office seemed to hum differently. Every time Michael called me into his office, I felt a quiet anticipation that I couldn't explain. Not nervousness exactly, something warmer, like stepping into a room where you know you belong, but aren't sure why it feels so comforting. One Thursday morning, he asked me to stay a few minutes after the team meeting. The room was quiet, the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the blinds, casting long, golden stripes across the floor. I sat down across from him, my hands resting loosely on my notebook, pretending to review notes while stealing glances at the subtle expressions that crossed his face. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced together, and spoke in that calm, deliberate tone I had come to associate with quiet authority and something more, something personal. "Marissa," he said, "I've been thinking about how we communicate, how rare it is to find someone who truly listens, not just to respond, but to understand." I felt a warmth spreading through me, like sunlight hitting bare skin on a chilly day. I think that's rare too," I admitted. "Even in this office, people listen, but rarely like that." He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "Exactly. That's why I appreciate our conversations. You make it easier to be honest, to be thoughtful, even about things I've kept to myself for a long time." For a moment, the office felt suspended, just the two of us in a quiet world of understanding. It wasn't about attraction, not in the obvious physical way, but in the way two people can connect so profoundly that words alone carry weight. My heart was pounding in my chest, not with fear, but with the thrill of being truly seen. He gestured toward the window. "Would you like to step outside for a moment?" The terrace again. The crisp air wrapped around us like a soft blanket, and the city below seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of us suspended in a quiet bubble. We walked slowly, and I noticed things I hadn't before. The faint smell of his cologne, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the way he walked with a calm certainty that grounded me. Then he stopped, turning to face me. His voice dropped to a near whisper, and I had to lean in slightly to catch his words. Marissa, I value you more than I've ever expressed. Not just your work, not just your mind, but the person you are. The kindness, the humor, the thoughtfulness. It's rare, and I notice it. I felt my breath catch. There was a depth in his words that made my pulse race in that strange, exhilarating way you only feel when someone looks at you and seems to see straight through to the core of who you are. I realized then that what I was feeling wasn't just admiration or curiosity. It was something quieter, yet infinitely more compelling. Recognition, respect, and a tender mutual connection that neither of us had forced, yet both had cultivated. I found myself speaking before I fully processed it. I felt the same way, Michael. I didn't know if it was appropriate to say it, but I notice you too, more than anyone else here. He smiled, that calm, reassuring smile that made everything feel safe. I'm glad you said that. I didn't want to risk saying it wrong or making it awkward, but I'm glad. We stayed there a while longer, letting the silence speak for us. No grand gestures, no hurried words, just the quiet understanding that something delicate and meaningful was unfolding between us. And in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, it was real, and it was ours. As we returned inside, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. Life had a way of surprising you, of opening doors you didn't even know were there. And sometimes the moments that seem ordinary, a meeting, a quiet conversation, a shared smile, are the ones that change everything. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when I realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. The office hummed with its usual rhythm, but for me, the pace of life had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Michael and I still shared our meetings, our quiet terrace walks, and our meaningful conversations, but now there was an unspoken depth in every glance, every word exchanged. That day he called me into his office one last time before the weekend. The late afternoon sun poured in through the blinds, painting the room in soft golden stripes. I felt a familiar flutter of anticipation, not nervousness, but the kind of excitement that comes from knowing someone sees you for who you truly are. Marissa, he said, as I settled into the chair across from him, I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, and about you. You've brought something into this office that I didn't even realize was missing. Your honesty, your insight, your warmth. It's made everything feel more human. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Michael, I feel the same way. I never expected to find someone who could listen like you do, or who could make me feel understood in a way I didn't know I needed. He smiled, that calm, steady smile, and leaned back slightly. I think we've both discovered something rare here, something that isn't about office politics or deadlines, but about recognizing the best in each other. I respect you, Marissa, deeply. It was then that I realized how much courage it had taken for both of us to be honest about what we felt. There was no rush, no pressure, just the mutual respect and understanding that had grown quietly between us. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for myself, for being brave enough to notice, to feel, and to acknowledge the connection. We spent the next few minutes simply talking, sharing small stories about our lives outside work, laughing softly, and appreciating the comfort of each other's company. It was ordinary in the most extraordinary way, the kind of moment that stays with you long after it's over because it feels both natural and significant. As I left the office that evening, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels, I felt a serene clarity. Life had a way of surprising you, of opening doors you didn't even know existed, and sometimes the most profound experiences arrive quietly, wrapped in ordinary moments. Walking home, I reflected on the unexpected journey I'd been on, from thinking it was just another meeting to discovering a deep, mutual understanding that was rare and precious. I realized that connection, respect, and emotional honesty weren't things you found every day, and when they appeared, you held onto them with care. Michael hadn't just whispered words I couldn't forget. He had reminded me of the power of being seen, truly seen, and of giving space for others to feel the same. And in that quiet, unexpected way, both of us had grown, not just as colleagues, but as people capable of noticing, appreciating, and valuing the depth in each other. That night, as I sat by the window with the city lights stretching into the distance, I smiled softly to myself. Life had given me a gift I hadn't anticipated, a reminder that meaningful connection can appear in the most ordinary places, and that the courage to feel, to speak, and to listen can transform even the simplest moments into something unforgettable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, profoundly grateful.